The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the day Nora Calloway set type. She had been at the composing stick since 6:30, setting an announcement for a grain merchant in Berwick, and her fingers were black to the second knuckle with ink when the boy knocked at the back of the print shop. She did not stop what she was doing. She called to him to leave it on the sill. He left it and ran, which told her something. Boys only ran when the errand had come from a house that paid well for speed. She read it after she washed her hands. She read it twice, standing at the basin with the water going cold. Mrs. Calloway, my employer requires the services of a printer at Harwick Hall. The matter concerns legal documents and cannot be entrusted to the post. You will be compensated for your time and the closure of your establishment. For however long the work requires, a carriage will come Friday at 7. Please be prepared to remain for a period of up to 2 weeks. It was signed by someone calling himself R. Dunmore, secretary to the Viscount Harwick. She set the letter down. She looked at the composing stick in its rack. She looked at the press. Her late husband, Owen, had built himself from a design in a German manual, which she had learned to operate in the year of their marriage and had run alone in the 3 years since his death. She looked at the tin box on the shelf where the accounts were kept, and where the accounts showed that the merchant on Drummond Street had not paid her for the October run, and that the solicitor's office had cancelled their standing order in November, and that the Parish Register Commission had reduced their quarterly order by half. She looked at the letter again. She had heard of Harwick Hall. Everyone in the county had heard of Harwick Hall. What they had heard was this. The old Viscount had died 4 years ago and left the estate to his elder son, Piers Aldcroft, who had been at sea since he was 19 and had come home at 31 to a house full of lawyers and a brother who had already been managing the land for 2 years and did not seem pleased to hand it back. There had been a dispute. There had been lawyers' letters going both ways across the county for the better part of a year. Then it had gone quiet. People said the Viscount had shut himself in at Harwick and refused callers. People said he had taken to drinking. People said a good many things, and Nora had not known which of them were true, and had not much cared until Tuesday. She wrote back by the boy who came for her answer. I will be ready at 7. The carriage came at 6:45, which told her something else. The driver did not speak. The road north climbed through spruce and old birch, and the sky over the hills was the particular flat white of a November morning in Nova Scotia that promised nothing and delivered cold. Nora sat with her leather case on her knees. The case held her setting tools, 3 ink brayers, a packet of cotton waste, her account book, and a change of linen. She had left a note for her neighbour, Mrs. Farwell, asking her to collect the post. She had banked the stove. She had locked the print shop door with the key Owen had cut himself. She had not been away from the print shop for 2 consecutive nights since Owen died. She did not think about that. She thought instead about the composing stick, and about whether the grain merchant's announcement could wait, and about what a Viscount wanted with a private printer badly enough to cloak to the public road for the purpose. The hall appeared between the trees at the top of the last rise. It was a long stone house, grey and serious, built in the manner of the Scottish houses as its builders had been remembering when they built it. One wing looked to have been added later. The addition was not quite the same stone. The grounds were tidy, but not well kept, which was a different thing. Someone had been cutting back the growth along the drive, but not recently. A woman came to the door before the carriage had fully stopped. She was perhaps 50, with a ring of keys at her belt, and the look of someone who had been expecting Nora, and had been worried about her arrival, and was now worried about something else entirely. Mrs. Dunmore, the housekeeper said. Mrs. Calloway, thank God, he is asking for you. He was asking for a printer, Nora said. He doesn't know me. He's been asking since last night, Mrs. Dunmore said, which is not what she meant by that. But she was already moving back inside, and Nora followed, because the alternative was standing in the cold by a carriage whose driver had already turned the horses. The house inside smelled of wood smoke and salt air, and something medicinal that Nora recognised as camphor oil. The floors were wide pine boards, worn pale at the centres. The walls held the dark rectangles where pictures had been, and were no longer. The house had been stripped at some point and not refurnished. What remained was good, and old and sparse. Mrs. Dunmore talked while she walked. He had been taken ill 4 days ago. The physician from Amherst had come twice and gone twice. He said it was the chest, that the Viscount needed rest and warmth and no agitation. He had left a powder and instructions. He had not, Mrs. Dunmore said with some precision, left any explanation for why a man in good health and not yet 35 had gone to bed one evening complaining of a headache and been found the next morning unable to stand. He asked for the printer from Berwick, she continued. From the list Mr. Ramsay kept. Mr. Ramsay was the secretary before Mr. Dunmore, my husband. He said Mrs. Calloway's husband had done the estate printing for 15 years and was to be trusted and was not to be replaced. His lordship said, "Get me Mrs. Calloway." He said it 4 times before I could write the letter. Nora said, "I print legal documents for half the county. I'm not a physician." "No," Mrs. Dunmore said. She stopped at a door, but Mr. Dunmore found something in his lordship's study last night that he did not think the physician needed to see. He thought you might. She opened the door. The room was a library, or had been. The shelves were still full, which gave it an air of purpose the rest of the house lacked. There was a fire. At the desk sat a thin man of about 45 with ink-stained fingers and spectacles pushed up onto his forehead. He stood when Nora came in. "Mrs. Calloway, Robert Dunmore. I was Mr. Ramsay's assistant. I wrote you the letter. Forgive the urgency." She sat. She looked at the thing he put on the desk in front of her. It was a printed document, a single page set in a typeface she recognised from the print shop in Halifax that handled estate work for the western counties. It bore the heading of a solicitor's firm in Truro, and it was dated 6 weeks prior, and it was a deed of trust transferring the management of the Harwick estate in the event of the Viscount's incapacity or death to his half-brother, Piers Aldcroft, for a period of not less than 12 years. It had the Viscount's signature at the bottom. Nora looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Where did you find this?" "In his lordship's desk, in the locked drawer. I have the key, because he gave it to me in October when he went to Halifax and needed me to forward correspondence. I was looking for the insurance papers for the mill." Mr. Dunmore paused. "I was not looking for that. Does he know it exists?" "I don't know. He was not well when I found it. He could not keep his eyes open. I sat with him an hour last night and tried to ask him, and he kept saying, 'Get me the printer. Get me Mrs. Calloway.'" Nora picked up the document. She read it again slowly. She had set type for solicitors since she was 17 years old, first alongside Owen and then alone, and she knew what a deed of trust looked like, and what it was supposed to contain, and what the absence of certain phrases usually meant. "Mr. Dunmore," she said, "this transfer is dated 6 weeks ago." "Yes." "The Viscount was in Halifax 6 weeks ago." "Yes." She set the paper down, and the signature. Mr. Dunmore looked at the fire. "I have seen his lordship's signature on 50 documents since October. That is his hand. But, Nora said, the clause at the bottom, the one beginning in the event of incapacity arising from illness or injury, however caused." He stopped. The Ramsay firm would not have written it that way. They never write it that way. The phrase they use is incapacity arising from natural cause. He took his spectacles off his forehead and held them. "I set enough of Mr. Ramsay's correspondence to know." Nora knew it too, she said. "Who is Piers Aldcroft?" "His lordship's half-brother, the old Viscount's son by a second wife. He managed the estate while his lordship was at sea. He was asked to step down when his lordship returned. He has been asking, through lawyers, to be reinstated in some capacity ever since." He paused. "He was here in October. He came for 2 weeks. He and his lordship did not quarrel, which surprised the household. He left on good terms." "He left on good terms," Nora said, "and 6 weeks later this appeared in the locked desk." She stood up. She wanted to see the press. Not now, not the deed she would return to. She needed to see the typeface. She needed to see what compositor had set the thing, and whether the spacing was correct, and whether the firm in Truro had actually printed it, or whether someone had done a very careful job of making it look as though they had. "Mr. Dunmore," she said, "take me to your employer. He was not dying." She established this in the first 2 minutes. He was ill, genuinely ill, with a fever that had been climbing for 3 days, and a chest that rattled when he breathed, and a pulse that was too fast and not quite regular. But he was conscious. He was watching her from the pillow with the grey eyes of a man who had given orders on moving ships in bad weather and was not accustomed to giving them from a horizontal position. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. "You came. You sent a carriage," she said. She pulled the chair close and sat. "I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to stay awake for them." He smiled at that. It was a brief smile, and it cost him something, but it was there. He had a good face. It was a weathered face, and not a young face, and it was the face of a man who had spent a long time outdoors in cold light, and none of that was what she noticed first. What she noticed first was that he was watching her with complete attention. "Your chest," she said. "Was it hurting before the headache?" "No, the headache came first, 3 days before I went to bed. I thought it was the cold coming on. I told no one." He paused. "I was a fool. The powder the physician left, did you take it?" "The first night. It helped nothing." He stopped. His breathing was the wrong kind of careful that meant each breath was a decision. "I stopped taking it on the second night. I didn't like the look of it. It was grey, and the camphor smell was wrong." He looked at her. "You're not a physician." No, she had her hand at his wrist counting. 46, not 40, not 48, 46, with a gap between the third and fourth. "I'm a printer, but my mother was the apothecary's assistant in Pictor for 20 years and I went with her from the time I could walk." He said nothing, and she continued. "Who prepared the powder? The physician, Dr. Farris, from Amherst." "Has Dr. Farris treated you before?" "No. My usual physician is Dr. Mowat in Parsborough. Dr. Farris was recommended by my brother, by Piers Aldcroft," Nora said. "By Piers," he said. He was very still. "Yes." She set his wrist down. She stood and went to the table by the window, where the powder lay in its paper twist, and she smelled it. The camphor was there, as he had said, but underneath it was something else. Something faintly sweet and faintly bitter, in the way that certain plant-based compounds were, the ones her mother had kept in the locked cabinet, and had made her learn by name and by smell before she was 12 years old. She put the powder in her skirt pocket. "Lord Aldcroft, Ian," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. That kind of looking took effort in his condition. She let it stand. "Ian," she said, "I need you to drink only what I bring you. Nothing from the kitchen until I have spoken to Mrs. Dunmore. Nothing from the physician if he returns. Can you do that?" "Yes." And then he said, "You found something. Mr. Dunmore found something. I would like to know if you know what it is. Tell me." She told him. She told him plainly, sitting in the chair by his bed, the way she told clients when a proof had come back wrong, and there was nothing to be done but say so. A deed of trust. 6 weeks old. His signature. The Halifax trip. Piers Aldcroft's name at the head of the management clause. He did not close his eyes. She had expected him to close his eyes. He kept them open and looked at the ceiling for a long time, and then he said, "I signed something in Halifax. Piers asked me to look at a document about the mill insurance. I was tired. I had been at meetings for 3 days. I signed where he told me to sign." She said nothing. He said, "I was a fool twice then. You didn't know." She rose. "I'm going to speak to Mrs. Dunmore about the kitchen. I'm going to look at that document again. I'm going to write a letter to Mr. Mowat in Parsborough, and I'm going to need your printing press if you have one," he said. "There's a small one in the East Room. It was the old Viscount's. It hasn't been used in 2 years. "That's all right," she said. "I brought my own ink." She did not sleep that night. She sat up in the East Room with the document and a lamp and her loupe, which she carried always in the leather case because Owen had taught her that a printer's eyes were not always enough. The typeface was Caslon, long face, the kind used by 3 shops in Halifax and 2 in Truro and 1 in Amherst. The spacing between the lines was 12 points. The leading was correct. The impression was even. Someone had been careful, but the period at the end of the second clause sat a hair too high. It was a matter of a fraction of a millimetre. Someone who had never set type would not have seen it. Someone who set type every day would not have stopped to consider it. Nora set type every day, and she had stopped to consider it at 17, when Owen first showed her the trick, which was that a period set too high meant the compositor had used a different type body for that character than for the rest of the line, which meant the period had been added after the rest of the line was set, which meant the sentence had not been complete when the original document was printed. She sat back. She looked at the clause again. In the event of incapacity arising from illness or injury, however caused. Without the period, the sentence continued, there was a line missing. A line that had, she thought, originally read something quite different, something along the lines of sustained in the performance of maritime duty, which would have been specific and limited and quite inapplicable to a man who had come home from the sea 3 years ago and was now ill in his own bed. Someone had reset that line. Someone had taken the document to a compositor, shown them the original, and said, change this phrase, and the compositor, working quickly, had not perfectly matched the body of the period. She wrote the letter to Dr. Mowat at 3 in the morning. She wrote a second letter to the Ramsay firm in Halifax. She wrote a third to the Printers Guild in Truro, which Owen had belonged to, and which Nora still paid dues to in his name, asking for the specimen books of every shop in the city. She sealed them all and put them by the door for the morning post. Then she sat at the old press and ran her hands over the type cases, orienting herself to the layout, which was an older layout than she used, but not unfamiliar. She had learned on a press like this one. She thought about what she was going to do on Friday, and whether it was enough, and whether she had 2 days to do it in. She thought she did. She thought it was close. She was at the Viscount's door at 6, with clean water, and a cup of broth she had made herself from the stock Mrs. Dunmore kept. The housekeeper had wept briefly when Nora told her what she thought was in the physician's powder. She had then dried her eyes and gone to the kitchen and told the cook to keep the larder locked and to refer all questions about the household's food to Mrs. Calloway. Nora had not asked for that authority. She noted it and was grateful and moved on. He was awake. He looked worse in the morning light than he had the night before, which was to be expected. He looked at her with the same focused attention. "You were up all night," he said. "I found something in the document." She poured the broth into a cup. "Drink this. I made it." He drank. He held the cup himself, which was a point in his favour. She told him about the period while he drank. He said, "You can tell all that from a period." "I can tell all that from a period." "My husband could have told you in 30 seconds. He was faster than me." She said it without thinking. It was the kind of thing she still did, referred to Owen in the present tense and then corrected, and usually she minded the correction, and this morning she did not. "Your husband was the printer before you." He said it without any particular inflection, just fact. He built the press himself. "He taught me everything I know about type." She set the cup back. "He died 3 years ago. We'd been married 4 years. We had no children. I kept the shop because I didn't know what else to do, and then I kept it because I was good at it." She stopped. "I don't know why I'm telling you that," he said. "Because I told you I was a fool twice over and did not flinch from it." She looked at him. He was not smiling, but he was something adjacent to it. "People tell me things when I don't flinch." She did not answer that. She picked up the cup and went to the door. "I ain," she said. "Yes, Piers Aldcroft. When does he usually arrive?" "He comes on the 1st of the month. It is the 28th. He paused. "And I expect, with things as they are, he will come sooner." She thought so too, she said. "Then I have 2 days. She had one. Piers Aldcroft came on the afternoon of the 29th in a hired coach from Amherst with 2 men she did not recognise and a lawyer named Spence, whose practice she knew by reputation because Owen had refused to print for him twice. He was a small, precise man who wore his coat like armour. He and Piers Aldcroft came in through the front of the house as if they owned it, which was, Nora supposed, the point. She had positioned herself in the library. She had put the deed of trust on the desk. She had put beside it a second document, one she had set and printed herself the night before on the old press in the East Room, in Caslon, 12-point body, 12-point leading. She had spent 3 hours on it. The impression was correct. The period at the end of the second clause was exactly where it ought to be. Mr. Dunmore brought them in. Piers Aldcroft was perhaps 40, fair-haired, with his half-brother's cheekbones, and none of his half-brother's directness. He had a manner that was warm and careful at once, the manner of a man who had learned long ago that warmth cost him nothing, and bought him a great deal. He stopped in the middle of the library carpet, and looked at Nora as if she were an unexpected piece of furniture. "Who is this?" he said to Mr. Dunmore. "Mrs. Calloway, Mr. Dunmore said. "She is the estate printer." Piers Aldcroft smiled. He had a good smile. "Mrs. Calloway, I'm sure whatever you've been asked to do here can wait. My brother is very ill, and we have matters to discuss with the household." "Your brother is sitting up," Nora said. "He asked me to begin the meeting without him." That was not precisely true. What Ian had said that morning was, "I would like to be there." She had said, "You can be there, or you can be well enough to fight the case at quarter sessions." He had looked at her for a long time. He had said, "Begin it without me, and come for me when you need me." She had said, "I'll come for you in 15 minutes. It had been 12. Piers Aldcroft sat down because there was nothing else to do. Spence sat beside him. Nora sat across the desk and folded her hands. "Mr. Aldcroft," she said, "I am going to show you 2 documents. I would like you to look at them carefully." She put the deed of trust in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at it with the expression of a man looking at something he already knows, which is to say no expression at all. "I've seen this," he said. "My brother signed it in Halifax. It's quite legal." She put the second document beside it. He looked at that too. "This is the same document," she said, "as it was originally printed. Before the second clause was altered. Before the phrase 'sustained in the performance of maritime duty' was removed and the words 'however caused' were substituted." She put her loupe on the desk beside the papers. "The period at the end of the second clause in your document sits 4/10 of a millimetre above the baseline. In the original, it sits correctly. A compositor in Truro reset that line. I have written to the Printers Guild there. I expect a reply by Thursday, but I expect you know which shop it was and could save us the time." She paused. "Your brother signed a document about mill insurance. He signed where he was told to sign. The sheet he was given contained 3 signatures and covered 4 pages. The pages he signed were pages 2 and 4. Pages 1 and 3, which contained the clauses, were substituted after the fact. That is not a legal document. That is a fraud." The room was quiet. Mr. Dunmore was standing by the door. Spence had gone the colour of old wax. Piers Aldcroft was looking at the 2 documents on the desk, and his face had gone careful in a new way, the way that meant he was choosing his next words with a great deal of precision. He said, "This is a very serious accusation." "It is not an accusation," Nora said. "It is a description of what I found in the type. You are welcome to bring your own compositor to examine it, and if I do not, then the documents go to the magistrate at Amherst with my written analysis, and the letter I have already sent to the Ramsay firm in Halifax, which will confirm that they did not draft this document, and that the firm named at the heading is not their firm but a variant of it." She looked at the heading of the deed. The Ramsay firm is spelled with 1 S. The firm named in this document is spelled with 2. Spence looked at the document. He had not looked at it before. He looked at it now very carefully, and Nora watched his face do the small, precise calculation of a man deciding what it would cost him. She knew that calculation. She had seen it on Owen's face when a client had given him a job that turned out to be something other than advertised. Owen had always come home afterward and told her exactly what had been decided and why. He had not liked the feeling of deciding it alone. She did not like it now. But she was not alone. She heard the door behind her and did not turn. "Piers," said a voice that was careful and dry and had been counting its strength for this moment. Nora did not move. She heard the footsteps and the careful pace of a man who was vertical through will and not comfort. She heard the chair at her right pulled out. He sat down beside her. He put the deed of trust in front of him, and he looked at his half-brother across the desk, and he said, "You may contest it, of course. You may take it to the magistrate yourself and let them examine the type. I will be well enough to attend the hearing. Nora will attend with her analysis. Mr. Dunmore will attend with his account of the Halifax trip." He paused and took a careful breath. "Or you may leave Harwick Hall today and write to the Ramsay firm and withdraw the deed. And I will not pursue the matter of Dr. Farris's powder, about which Nora has sent a letter to Dr. Mowat in Parsborough." Piers Aldcroft looked at his brother. He looked at him for a long time. He looked the way a man looked when he had built something carefully over a long period and had come to collect it and found it gone. He said, "The estate was never going to be yours. Father said so. Father told me when I was 12 years old that when you came back from sea there would be nothing for you to come back to." Ian said, "I know what Father told you. I also know he was wrong and he knew it, and he didn't change the will because he was a coward and not because you were right." Piers looked at him. "You managed the estate competently," Ian said. "I have never said otherwise. You will receive what fathers will entitle you to receive, and you will have the use of the Amherst house for your lifetime. That is what I offered you 3 years ago. It is still what I offer you, and the powder?" Piers said. "Dr. Farris," Nora said, "will account for the powder to the College of Physicians in Halifax. That is not my decision to make and not yours to prevent." Piers sat very still. Spence beside him had folded his hands on his knees and appeared to be examining the floor. Then Piers Aldcroft stood up. He stood the way a man stood when he had decided something and was committing to it and would not revisit it. He picked up his coat from the arm of the chair. He did not look at the documents on the desk. He said, "I'll write to the Ramsay firm." He went. Spence went behind him without having spoken a word beyond his own name. The door closed. Nora sat without moving for a moment. Then she became aware that the man beside her had set his hand on the desk and that the hand was not steady, and she stood and said, "Come, you've done enough." He let her take his arm. Going back up the stair, he said, "You were going to do that alone, before I came in?" "Yes." He said nothing for a moment. They came to the landing. He said, "Why?" "Because it was my analysis," she said. "Because I was the one who found it. Because if he had decided to press the matter, I was the one who needed to be standing there and not sitting off to the side while someone else spoke for me." He looked at her. He was grey with effort, and the fever was still in his face, and he was looking at her with the attention he had given her from the first. "You'd have done it," he said. "I'd have done it," she said. She took him back to his room. She settled him in the chair by the fire with a blanket, because he would not go back to bed while it was still light. She went and wrote a second letter to Dr. Mowat with the full details of the powder, which she had identified by then as a compound of foxglove and something her mother had called grey nightshade, used in very small doses for certain heart complaints and in larger ones for the opposite purpose. She was not a physician. She said so plainly at the top of the letter. She said what she had smelled and what she knew from 20 years of listening to her mother name things, and she said that a medical man should decide the rest. She sealed the letter. She put it with the others. She sat at the desk in the east room for a while with her hands in her lap. Owen had been dead for 3 years. She had not sat with her hands in her lap since Owen died, or not that she could remember. There was always the composing stick, or the ledger, or the correspondence, or the lock on the back door of the print shop that needed seeing to. There was always the next thing. She thought about the next thing now, and the next thing was that she had 4 days of work agreed on, and a carriage that would take her home on the 5th morning, and a print shop in Berwick with a grain merchant's announcement still half set in the frame, and an account book that showed a gap where the solicitor's standing order had been. She thought about the mercury lamp Owen had talked about getting for years and never got, which would have let her work later in the winter evenings. She thought about Iron Aldcroft's hand on the desk and how it had not been steady. She put her hands on the press and began to read the type cases. Caslon, long face. She could work with that. She pulled out the document she had set the night before, the corrected one, and she read it through again, and she thought that it was good work. She thought Owen would have said it was good work. She had not set type in someone else's shop in 8 years, and it had come back quickly, the way things did when they were in the body and not only in the mind. The fire in the east room, great, needed banking. She banked it. She took her lamp and went to check on the Viscount. He was asleep in the chair. He had not made it to the bed. His head was on his own shoulder, and his breathing had eased a little in the past hour, which she took as a good sign. She sat across from him with her knitting, which she had brought from her bag, because she could not sit with nothing in her hands, and the composing stick was in the other room. She sat with him until the fire burned down. 4 days passed. Dr. Mowat came on the second day. He was a lean, brisk man of 60 with the bedside manner of someone who had been right a great many times and had decided to trust himself. He read Nora's letter, examined the powder, examined the patient, and said 3 things. The first was that the compound she had identified was consistent with a preparation intended to weaken the heart over a period of weeks. The second was that the patient had been very fortunate in his own refusal to continue taking it. The third was that Mrs. Calloway's analysis was correct, and that he would submit his own to the College of Physicians in Halifax by Friday. He shook her hand when he left, which Owen's colleagues had not done in 4 years of her running the shop alone, and she was surprised enough by it that she did not say anything until his horse was already at the end of the drive. On the third day, the answer came from the Ramsay firm. They had not drafted the document. They did not know the firm whose name had been adapted from their own. They were writing to the Law Society. On the fourth day, Ian Aldcroft came downstairs for the first time, walked the length of the hall, and came back without stopping. He was still grey. He held the wall at 2 points. He was upright the whole way. Nora watched from the library door. He saw her watching and did not say anything. He sat down in the hall chair and breathed. Then he said, "My father's press in the East Room." It was his father's before. He used to set the tenants' notices himself rather than pay a printer. He was a difficult man, but he was not extravagant. "I know the type layout," she said. "It's an older style, but it's sound." He looked at her. He was trying to say something he did not know how to say, and she saw him trying and she waited. He said, "The estate printing. Ramsay handled it for years before you and Owen took it over." Whatever agreement was in place then, she said Owen had a quarterly contract. £8, he said. I was going to say 12. Given the distance from Berwick, she kept her face where it was. £12 quarterly was the difference between the account book as it stood and the account book with the solicitor's order restored. It was the mercury lamp. It was a new set of pie type, which had been on Owen's list for 2 years before he died, and had stayed on hers. "I'll want it in writing," she said. He smiled at that. It was a better smile than the first one, the one in the sick room. This one was not costing him something. This one was the smile of a man who had decided where he was and was not unhappy about it. "I would expect nothing less," he said. "Mrs. Calloway." "Nora," she said. He looked at her. "If we're to have a business arrangement for £12 quarterly," she said, "you may as well call me Nora. Otherwise every letter from the estate is going to feel like a summons," he said. "Then you'll call me Ian." "I'll call you Ian in private," she said. "In the documents I'll call you Viscount Harwick," he said. "That seems exactly right." The carriage came on the 5th morning, which was a Saturday. Mrs. Dunmore packed her a hamper. The cook put in a jar of the potted fish that Nora had said, without thinking about it, was the best she'd had in a long time. And Mrs. Dunmore put in a second jar because, she said, they made it every month and there was always more than the household needed. Nora came down with her leather case and the hamper and stood in the hall. Ian Aldcroft came down the stair. He was dressed, properly dressed, which was the first time she had seen him in anything but a nightshirt and a dressing gown, and it was briefly disorienting in the way that all recoveries were, the way a patient who had been horizontal for a week looked entirely different upright. He walked to the door with her. He said, "I'll send the contract by Thursday." She said, "I'll send back the signed copy by Friday, at the latest," he said. "The road is difficult in December," she said. "I've driven it in January. The press doesn't close for weather." He looked at her. He said, "Nora." She waited. He said, "Owen chose well." She did not know for a moment what to do with that. Then she said he chose the press himself too. From a German manual, he drew the plans out on the kitchen table and built it in the yard over a summer. She stopped. "He was a good man." "Yes," Ian said. "I think he must have been." She went down the front steps and got into the carriage. The driver did not speak. The road south descended through the spruce and the old birch. The sky was the flat white of a November morning in Nova Scotia that promised nothing and delivered cold. Nora sat with her case on her knees and the hamper at her feet and watched the hall disappear between the trees. She thought about the print shop. She thought about the grain merchant's announcement, which could still make the Thursday issue if she was at the composing stick by 6 on Monday. She thought about the account book and the gap where the solicitor's order had been, and what £12 quarterly looked like in that gap. She thought about a man who had said Owen chose well, and had meant it the way a man meant something he had decided about himself, and not only about her. She had been away from the print shop for 5 nights. It was the longest she had been gone since Owen died. The carriage came out of the trees at the top of the Berwick Road. The harbour was below, and the town, and the grey November sea beyond it. The print shop was on Chandler Street, 3rd from the corner, with Owen's name still on the sign, because it was his name too, and she had seen no reason to take it down. She would be at the composing stick by 6. 18 months later, the Ramsay firm wrote to confirm that the matter of the fraudulent deed had been resolved at the Court of Sessions. Piers Aldcroft had entered a guilty plea on the lesser charge and had removed to England. Dr. Farris had surrendered his licence. The letter came on a Tuesday, which was the day Nora set type. She read it standing at the basin, with the water going cold, the way she had read the first letter 18 months before. She read it twice. Then she set it on the shelf beside the tin box, next to the framed print Owen had made the first year of the shop, which was a proof of his own name in the large display type they almost never used, set just to see how it looked. The quarterly contract had been running for a year. The mercury lamp was on the table at the back of the shop. The pie type was in the case. There was a new commission from the Harwick estate that involved printing the hall's household records in a bound format, which was 3 weeks of work and the largest single commission since Owen's time. Ian Aldcroft had come to the print shop twice, once in March, for the signing of a document that could have been posted, but hadn't been. Once in July, when he had been in Berwick for the agricultural meeting, and had come by at the end of the day, and stayed for tea. He had sat at the composing table, and she had shown him the pie case, and he had asked questions that were not a visitor's questions, the kind that assumed the next visit. He had not proposed anything. He had said nothing that required an answer. He had sat in Owen's chair at the composing table and drunk his tea and looked at the press the way a man looked at something he was still deciding how to feel about, and was not in a hurry about the deciding. She was not in a hurry either. There was time. The shop was here. The press was here. She put the letter from the Ramsay firm on the shelf. She picked up the composing stick. She read the morning's copy. She set the first line of type. She did not go to Harwick Hall because she had been summoned. She went because the road was passable and the work was there, and because when a contract ran for a year without a dispute, the parties were usually worth knowing better. She went because she had chosen to.